I never thought I'd be the kind of mother-in-law who counted every dollar spent in her own house. But there I was, at 62 years old, watching my savings account like a hawk watches a field mouse. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how my own family tried to drain me dry, and how I found the strength to say enough is enough. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September. The leaves outside my kitchen window were just beginning to turn, those first hints of gold and crimson that always made me think of my late husband, Richard. He'd passed 3 years ago, leaving me with this 4-bedroom colonial in suburban Connecticut and what I thought was a comfortable retirement fund. $130,000 to be exact. Not a fortune, but enough to see me through my remaining years if I was careful. Richard and I had worked our entire lives for that money. He'd spent 40 years at the same manufacturing company, starting on the factory floor, sweeping dust and hauling equipment, working his way up through quality control, then shift supervisor, and finally to plant manager. I'd been a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses over the decades, always careful with numbers, always planning for the future. We'd raised 2 children in this house, Derek and Rebecca, and we'd done it on modest salaries with no help from anyone. We'd clipped coupons, driven used cars until they fell apart, taken vacations to the Jersey Shore instead of Europe. Every sacrifice was an investment in our future, in the security we'd have when we were old. The morning light streamed through the window above the sink, catching the dust motes floating in the air. I remember thinking how peaceful the house was, how quiet. Since Richard died, the silence had become both my companion and my torment. Some mornings I found it soothing, a balm after decades of noise and activity. Other mornings, like this one, it felt oppressive, a reminder of everything I'd lost. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard the front door open. No knock, no doorbell, just the sound of keys in the lock and then footsteps on the hardwood floor. Heavy footsteps, confident footsteps, the footsteps of someone who believed they had every right to be there. I'd given Derek a spare key years ago, back when Richard was sick and we needed help around the house. Someone had to let the hospice nurses in when I was too exhausted to get out of bed. Someone had to pick up prescriptions and groceries. Derek had volunteered, and I'd been grateful. I'd never thought to ask for the key back after Richard passed. It had seemed unnecessary, even cruel. Now I wondered if that had been a mistake. Derek. Mom, you up? That was my son, Derek. 40 years old and still announcing himself like he was coming home from high school. He'd been a handful as a teenager, always pushing boundaries, always convinced he knew better than everyone else. He'd gotten arrested once for underage drinking, had nearly flunked out of community college before scraping by with a business degree from a mediocre state school. Richard used to say he'd grow out of it, that boys needed time to find themselves. He never did. Instead, he found Vanessa. Margaret. In the kitchen, honey. He appeared in the doorway, and behind him was Vanessa, his wife of 12 years. She was already on her phone, her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen, barely glancing up to acknowledge me. Vanessa was 10 years younger than Derek, blonde and beautiful, and always dressed like she was about to walk a runway or attend a garden party at some exclusive country club. She had this way of looking at people that made you feel evaluated, measured, found wanting. When they'd first started dating, I'd tried so hard to like her. I'd invited her to family dinners, included her in holiday traditions, bought her thoughtful gifts, welcomed her into our home with open arms. But there was always something calculated about her, something that made me feel like she was evaluating every interaction for what she could gain from it. Richard had seen it too. He'd pulled me aside after their engagement party, his face creased with worry. Richard. That girl is trouble, Margaret. I can see it in her eyes. She looks at Derek like he's a meal ticket. I'd shushed him then, told him he was being unfair, that we needed to give her a chance. I'd told myself that she came from a difficult background, that her father had abandoned her family when she was young, that she'd learned to be calculating because she'd had to be. I'd made excuses for her for 12 years. I wasn't going to make them anymore. Derek. We need to talk about something. Margaret. Good morning to you too. Would you like some coffee? Vanessa. We don't have time for coffee, Margaret. This is important. The way she said my name, clipped and dismissive, sent a familiar flash of irritation through me. In 12 years of marriage to my son, she had never once called me Mom, or even Mother Patterson. It was always Margaret, said with barely concealed impatience, as if my very existence was an inconvenience she was forced to tolerate. I set down my mug and gestured to the kitchen table. The same table where I'd fed my children breakfast for 18 years, where Richard and I had sat drinking wine and talking about our days, where I'd helped Tyler with his homework during those 6 months they'd lived with us, where I'd been sitting alone every morning since Richard died. The wood was worn smooth from decades of use, marked with the rings of countless coffee cups, the scratches from Tyler's toy cars, the burn mark from the time Derek had left a candle too close to the edge. Every mark told a story. Every scratch was a memory. They sat across from me, and I noticed Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. That was never a good sign. Even as a boy, when he'd broken something or gotten into trouble, he'd look anywhere but at my face. He'd look at the ceiling, at his shoes, at some distant point over my shoulder. It was his tell, his giveaway. Richard used to say you could always tell when Derek was about to ask for something because he'd start studying the architecture. Derek. So, Mom, you know how Vanessa's been wanting to start her interior design business? Margaret. You've mentioned it. Mentioned it was an understatement so enormous it was almost laughable. For the past 2 years, every conversation with Vanessa had somehow circled back to her dreams of becoming an interior designer. Every dinner, every phone call, every holiday gathering. How talented she was. How her friends were always asking for her advice on decorating. How she had such an eye for color and texture and space. How unfair it was that the market was so competitive, that the established designers had all the connections, that nobody gave newcomers a chance. How she just needed one break, one opportunity, one infusion of capital to prove herself. I'd heard the pitch so many times I could recite it in my sleep. I'd seen the mood boards she'd created, the Instagram account she'd started, the business cards she'd printed. Interior design by Vanessa, they said, in elegant gold script. Transform your space, transform your life. She'd handed them out to everyone at Tyler's birthday party last year, pressing them into the hands of neighbors and relatives with her brightest smile. Vanessa. It's not just wanting to start it, Margaret. I have real talent. Everyone says so. My Instagram has over 2,000 followers now. Margaret. That's nice, dear. Vanessa. Nice? It's more than nice. It's proof that I have what it takes. But starting a business takes capital. And the banks are being ridiculous about loans right now. They want collateral. They want business plans. They want proof of income. It's like they don't want people to succeed. I bit back the response that rose to my lips. Banks wanted those things because loans were risky, because most new businesses failed, because they needed some assurance they'd get their money back. But Vanessa had never been good with concepts like risk and consequence. In her world, wanting something was enough justification for having it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, a familiar dread that I'd come to associate with these conversations. I knew where this was going. We'd been here before, 3 times in the past 2 years, and each time had ended the same way, with me writing a check I couldn't afford, and watching the money disappear into the bottomless pit of Derek and Vanessa's lifestyle. The first time, it was $15,000 for Derek's can't-miss investment opportunity. He'd shown up at my door one evening, practically vibrating with excitement, talking about cryptocurrency and blockchain and decentralized finance. terms I didn't understand, concepts that sounded like science fiction. But he'd been so sure, so convinced that this was his ticket to financial freedom. He'd shown me charts and graphs on his phone, projections that showed our investment doubling, tripling, even quadrupling within 6 months. I'd wanted to believe him. I'd wanted so badly for my son to succeed at something, to find his footing, to prove all my doubts wrong. So I'd written the check. The investment missed spectacularly. The cryptocurrency crashed within weeks, taking every penny with it. Derek never acknowledged the loss, never apologized, never even mentioned it again. When I'd finally worked up the courage to ask what had happened, he'd shrugged and said, "That's how the market works, that you win some and you lose some," that he'd learned valuable lessons that would help him with the next opportunity. I never saw a dollar of that money again. The second time, it was $20,000 for Vanessa's online boutique. She'd had a vision, she said, for a curated collection of affordable luxury items, clothes and accessories and home goods that looked expensive but weren't, targeted at young professionals who wanted to look successful before they actually were. She'd spent months sourcing products from overseas suppliers, building a website with elaborate photography, creating a brand identity with custom logos and packaging. She'd even rented a small storage unit to serve as her warehouse. The boutique lasted exactly 4 months before she declared it wasn't working and shut it down. The suppliers were unreliable, she said. The shipping costs were too high. The customers were too demanding, wanting refunds and exchanges for the slightest imperfections. It wasn't her fault. The market just wasn't ready for her vision. I found out later, through a slip of Tyler's tongue, that most of my money had gone toward a complete wardrobe renovation for Vanessa herself. The closet full of designer clothes and shoes I'd noticed during my last visit to their house hadn't been samples for the boutique. They'd been her personal shopping spree, funded by my retirement savings. The third time, it was $10,000 for my grandson Tyler's private school tuition. Derek had called me in tears one night, his voice breaking with emotion. Tyler was struggling in public school, he said. The classes were too big, the teachers were overwhelmed, the other kids were mean to him. He needed more individual attention, a more nurturing environment, a school that would recognize his potential and help him flourish. There was a private academy nearby, one with small class sizes and excellent teachers, and a track record of getting students into good colleges. But the tuition was steep, and they couldn't afford it on their own. I'd written the check because I loved my grandson. Tyler was the bright spot in all of this, a sweet kid who somehow hadn't been corrupted by his parents' entitlement. He called me every week just to chat, sent me handmade cards for my birthday, had held my hand at Richard's funeral when I couldn't stop crying. The thought of him struggling, of him being unhappy, broke my heart. A month later, Tyler let slip that they'd actually spent the summer in the Bahamas, a 2-week vacation at an all-inclusive resort with excursions and spa treatments and gourmet dining. The private school never materialized. When I'd confronted Derek about it, he'd gotten defensive and angry, accused me of calling him a liar, said the trip had been booked before he'd called me, said the tuition money was still sitting in a savings account waiting for the next enrollment period. I'd pretended to believe him because the alternative was too painful, accepting that my own son had lied to my face to steal money from me. Margaret. How much are you asking for? Vanessa. 50,000. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The number was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that laughter was the only response my body could produce. $50,000. Nearly half of everything I had. More than Richard and I had earned in our best year, back when both of us were working full-time and the economy was booming. For a woman who had never finished a project in her life, who had treated my money like it was disposable, who looked at me right now like I was the obstacle standing between her and her dreams, rather than a human being with my own needs and fears. Vanessa. I don't see what's funny about this. Margaret. Vanessa, I don't have $50,000 to give away. Derek. Mom, come on. We know about Dad's life insurance. We know you've got money sitting in the bank doing nothing. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Money from Richard's death. The money that was supposed to see me through the rest of my life, described as doing nothing, as if the security of having a safety net was worthless. As if my peace of mind, my ability to sleep at night knowing I wouldn't end up destitute, didn't matter. As if I was being selfish for not wanting to hand over my life savings to fund my daughter-in-law's latest whim. Margaret. That money isn't doing nothing. It's my retirement. It's my security. It's what's going to pay for my care if I get sick, for my property taxes, for my groceries, for my life. Vanessa, you're being selfish. The word hit me like a slap across the face. Selfish. After everything I'd given them over the years. After opening my home to them for 6 months when Derek lost his job 5 years ago, when the company he worked for went bankrupt and laid off everyone without warning. I'd cooked for them every night, done their laundry, watched Tyler so they could go on date nights and job interviews. I'd given them the master bedroom while I slept in the small guest room because Vanessa said she needed space for her anxiety. I'd listened to their arguments through the walls at night, cleaned up after their messes, pretended not to notice when food disappeared from my refrigerator and toiletries vanished from my bathroom. After paying for their wedding when Vanessa's parents claimed they couldn't afford to contribute, her mother had shown up in a designer dress and dripping with jewelry, but apparently couldn't spare a dime for the ceremony. That wedding had cost me $30,000, money I'd saved over 5 years for a trip to Europe that Richard and I had always dreamed of taking. We were going to see Paris and Rome and Barcelona, the places we'd talked about since our honeymoon. We never went. Instead, Vanessa got her dream wedding at a country club, with 300 guests and a live band and a custom cake that cost more than my first car. After every birthday gift, every Christmas present, every graduation party and holiday dinner and random request for help. Every time they came to me with their hands out and their excuses ready, and I'd given because that's what mothers do, because I loved my son, because I didn't want to be the kind of parent who held grudges or kept score. But I had been keeping score, even when I pretended not to. I added it up sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, and the silence of the empty house pressed down on me like a weight. Over the years, I'd given Derek and Vanessa close to $100,000, money that had evaporated into their lifestyle without a single word of genuine gratitude, without any acknowledgement of the sacrifice it represented. Margaret, I think you should leave now. Derek, Mom, don't be like this. Margaret, like what? Like a woman who wants to keep a roof over her head? Like a mother who's tired of being treated like an ATM? There was a sharpness in my voice that surprised even me. I'd spent my whole life being accommodating, being understanding, being the bigger person, being the peacekeeper who smoothed over conflicts and found compromises. Richard used to tell me I was too nice, that people took advantage of my kindness, that there was a difference between being generous and being a doormat. I'd always brushed him off, said that generosity was a virtue, that I'd rather err on the side of giving too much than too little. But sitting here, watching my son and his wife look at me with barely concealed irritation, Because I wouldn't hand over my life savings, I felt something shift inside me. A crack in the foundation of who I thought I was, or maybe the beginning of who I needed to become. Vanessa, this is exactly why Derek didn't want to ask you. He knew you'd make this difficult. Margaret, then why did you come? They exchanged a look, one of those married couple looks that holds an entire conversation. I'd seen Richard and I exchange looks like that, wordless communications built over years of partnership, where a raised eyebrow or a slight nod could convey volumes. But theirs wasn't partnership. It was conspiracy. A shared understanding that they were on one team and I was the opponent, the obstacle to be overcome or outmaneuvered. Then Vanessa stood up, smoothing her designer jeans with perfectly manicured hands. Her nails were done in some elaborate pattern, geometric shapes and shades of pink and gold that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I noticed she was carrying a new handbag too, something with designer hardware that glinted in the morning light. Vanessa, fine, we'll figure it out ourselves. We always do. They left without saying goodbye, the front door slamming behind them with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after they were gone, my coffee growing cold in its cup, my heart growing colder in my chest. Outside, the September sun was bright and cheerful, completely indifferent to the turmoil inside this house. A cardinal landed on the bird feeder Richard had built during his first summer of retirement, a project that had taken him weeks to perfect. The bird pecked at seeds, went about its simple bird life, untroubled by questions of family loyalty and financial exploitation. I thought about calling my daughter Rebecca. She lived in Oregon now, had built a good life for herself as a nurse practitioner at a community health clinic. She'd moved away right after college, putting 3,000 miles between herself and the dysfunction that seemed to follow Derek wherever he went. She told me once, during a rare moment of candor, that she'd needed to escape before Derek's entitlement infected her too. That she'd watched him manipulate our parents for years and had been terrified of becoming either like him or complicit in his behavior. We talked every Sunday, and she never asked me for money. In fact, she usually tried to send me things, little gifts she thought I'd like, care packages for my birthday filled with fancy teas and handmade soaps, but I didn't want to burden her with this. She had her own problems, her own life, a demanding job where she worked 60-hour weeks, a recent breakup from a boyfriend she'd thought was the one, the stress of living in a city where she knew almost no one. She didn't need to spend her energy worrying about me, fighting battles that weren't hers to fight. Instead, I did what I always did when I felt lost. I went to visit Richard. The cemetery was quiet that afternoon, the way it always was on weekdays. I parked near the old oak tree that Richard had liked, the one with branches that spread out like open arms, like a grandfather welcoming his grandchildren for a hug. I'd thought of that image when we'd chosen his plot, had pictured him resting there beneath those protective branches for all eternity. I brought fresh flowers, yellow roses, his favorite. He'd given me yellow roses on our first date, a gesture so old-fashioned and sincere that I'd fallen a little bit in love with him right then. He'd kept bringing them throughout our marriage, for anniversaries and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays when he wanted to remind me he loved me. I sat on the little bench near his headstone and told him everything, the way I always did, even though he couldn't answer, even though some part of me knew it was just grief dressed up as conversation, a way of keeping him present in a world that had moved on without him. Margaret, they think I'm made of money, Richard. They think I owe them something. But I worked my whole life, just like you did. We saved and sacrificed so we could have something at the end. Remember when Derek wanted that car for his 16th birthday? The sports car that cost more than our first year's mortgage payments? He'd circled it in magazines, left catalogs on the kitchen table, talked about nothing else for months. We said no, and he didn't speak to us for a month. Called us cheap, said his friends' parents loved them enough to buy them nice things. But we held the line because we knew better. We knew that giving him everything he wanted wasn't love, it was laziness. A breeze rustled through the oak leaves, and I imagined it was Richard, nodding along, agreeing with me the way he always had when I needed validation. Margaret. And now they want to take it all. Not just some of it, all of it. Like everything we built together is just their emergency fund, something to dip into whenever they run out of other options. Vanessa said I was being selfish. Can you believe that? After everything we've given them. After the wedding and the bailouts and the 6 months they lived under our roof. She looked at me like I was the villain because I want to keep enough money to survive. The sun was warm on my face, the September air carrying the first hints of autumn. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. Life going on, indifferent to grief and betrayal and family drama. Margaret. What do I do, Richard? He's our son. I love him, but I don't know how much more I can give. I don't know how to love him without losing myself in the process. Of course, he didn't answer, but sitting there, in the presence of his memory, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. Richard would never have let anyone walk over him like this. He was kind, but he was firm. He believed in helping people who helped themselves, not in enabling people who saw handouts as their birthright. He used to say that the greatest gift you could give someone was the opportunity to earn their own success, and the greatest curse was to rob them of that opportunity by doing everything for them. Margaret. I think I've been cursing Derek his whole life. I think I've been so afraid of him being unhappy that I've made it impossible for him to be anything else. I stayed until the sun started to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The colors reflected off Richard's headstone, making the granite glow with borrowed warmth. I gathered my things, touched my fingers to the cold stone one last time, and drove home with a new resolve burning in my chest. I would not give them the money. I would not let guilt or family obligation push me into poverty. I would not sacrifice my security for people who saw my generosity as weakness to be exploited. This was my life, and I had every right to protect it. But life, as it often does, had other plans. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my grandson. Tyler was 17, a senior in high school, and unlike his parents, he actually seemed to care about me as a person, rather than a source of funds. He'd been a thoughtful child from the start, always making me birthday cards by hand, even when store-bought ones would have been easier. He'd spent hours in my garden helping me plant bulbs and pull weeds, not because he had to, but because he enjoyed my company. When Richard was dying, Tyler had come to sit with him for hours, reading aloud from Richard's favorite books, keeping him company when the rest of us were too overwhelmed to function. He'd held my hand at the funeral, this 13-year-old boy trying to be strong for his grandmother while his own heart was breaking. Tyler. Grandma, can I come over after school? I need to talk to you about something. His voice was serious in a way that made me pay attention. Tyler was usually lighthearted, always ready with a joke or a funny story about his friends or some ridiculous video he'd seen online. But today he sounded older, worried, like he was carrying something too heavy for his young shoulders. Margaret. Of course, sweetheart. I'll make those cookies you like. Tyler. The chocolate chip ones with the sea salt? Margaret. Is there any other kind? A brief laugh, but it didn't quite reach his voice. Tyler. Thanks, Grandma. I'll be there around 4. I spent the afternoon baking, trying not to worry, trying not to imagine all the terrible things that might have prompted this call. The kitchen filled with the smell of chocolate chips and butter and vanilla, the same recipe my mother had taught me 50 years ago, the same recipe I'd taught Rebecca, the same recipe I hoped to someday teach Tyler if he ever showed interest. Baking was my comfort, my meditation, my way of transforming worry into something tangible and warm. Tyler arrived at 4 on the dot, still in his school clothes, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He'd grown so much in the past year, nearly 6 feet now, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. But there was something different about him that day. A heaviness in his shoulders, a worry in his face that didn't belong on someone so young. He looked like he hadn't slept well, like he'd been carrying this burden for days and had finally reached the point where he couldn't carry it alone anymore. Tyler. Thanks for the cookies, Grandma. He sat at the kitchen table, picking at a cookie without really eating it, crumbling pieces off the edges and letting them fall onto the plate. I poured him a glass of milk, the way I'd done since he was 5, and sat across from him with my own cup of tea. Margaret. You're welcome. Now tell me what's wrong. He took a deep breath, and I watched him struggle with something. His jaw tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Whatever this was, it was big. Whatever this was, it scared him. Tyler. I don't know if I should tell you this. I mean, they're my parents. I should be loyal to them, right? That's what family means. You stick together, you protect each other, you don't air dirty laundry. But I can't pretend I didn't see it. I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not. Margaret. See what, Tyler? Finally, he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. His hand was trembling slightly, like he was handing me a loaded weapon instead of a piece of technology. Tyler. Look at this. It was a text message conversation between his parents. I shouldn't have read it, I knew that. Privacy mattered, trust mattered. But Tyler was clearly upset, his face pale and his eyes fixed on the table, and I needed to understand why. My eyes scanned the screen, and with each message, I felt my heart sink lower in my chest. Vanessa. Just use your mom's card. She's got like 130 grand sitting there. Derek. She said no about the business money. Vanessa. So don't ask. Just use the card. She probably won't even notice. Old people never check their accounts. Derek. That's fraud, Vanessa. I could go to jail. Vanessa. It's family. It's different. No jury would convict you for borrowing money from your own mother. Besides, she owes us after how cheap she's been all these years. Derek. I don't know. Vanessa. Tyler's college is coming up. We need that money. Your mother is going to die eventually anyway. Might as well use it now when we actually need it, rather than letting some nursing home get it all. I read the messages 3 times, each time feeling something crack a little more inside me. My own son, the baby I'd carried and birthed and nursed and raised, discussing stealing from me like it was a minor inconvenience rather than a betrayal of everything family was supposed to mean. My daughter-in-law, the woman I'd welcomed into our family despite my reservations, talking about my death like it was an inconvenience she was waiting for, a delay in her access to funds she considered rightfully hers. Margaret. When was this? Tyler. Last night. I heard them arguing about it in the kitchen, so I snuck downstairs to listen. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough to know something was wrong. So I waited until Mom was in the shower and checked her phone. I know it was wrong. I know I shouldn't have invaded her privacy. But Grandma, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just not tell you. His voice cracked on the last words, and I reached across the table to take his hand. This boy, this almost man, had just betrayed his parents to protect me. He'd put himself in an impossible position, choosing loyalty to his grandmother over loyalty to the people who'd raised him. The courage that must have taken, the love that must have motivated him, brought tears to my eyes. Margaret. You did the right thing, Tyler. I'm proud of you. Tyler. I feel like I'm betraying them. Margaret. You're not betraying anyone. You're standing up for what's right. There's a difference between loyalty and complicity. Loyalty means supporting the people you love. Complicity means helping them do wrong. You chose to be loyal to what's right, and that takes more courage than looking the other way. Tyler, what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when your own family is plotting against you? When the son you raised, the son you loved unconditionally, is considering theft because his wife convinced him you owed them. When the woman who shares your grandchild is casually discussing your death as a financial windfall, as an event to be anticipated rather than mourned. I looked at Tyler, at his worried face, at the weight on his young shoulders. He shouldn't have to carry this, but he'd chosen to, because he loved me, because he knew right from wrong even when his parents didn't. Margaret, I'm going to protect myself, and I want you to know, Tyler, that no matter what happens between me and your parents, I love you. That will never change. You're not responsible for their choices, and you won't be punished for telling me the truth. He hugged me then, this almost man who was still in so many ways the little boy who used to catch fireflies in my backyard, who used to beg me to read him one more story before bed, who used to tell me I was his favorite person in the whole world. And I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I was going to protect what was mine. And I was going to do it for Tyler as much as for myself, to show him that there was another way, that you didn't have to accept exploitation just because it came wrapped in family ties. The next morning, I went to the bank. Not just any branch, but the main office downtown, the one with the marble floors and the brass fixtures and the serious-looking security guards standing at attention near the door. It was the kind of bank that made you feel like your money was safe, like nothing bad could happen to it within these walls. I asked to speak with the manager and was escorted to an office with leather chairs and framed certificates on the walls and a window overlooking the city streets. His name was Robert Chen, a serious man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a firm handshake that conveyed competence and trustworthiness. He reminded me a little of Richard, the same quiet competence, the same air of someone who could be trusted with important things. Robert. How can I help you today, Mrs. Patterson? Margaret. I need to add some security to my accounts. Additional verification, alerts, whatever you can do. I need to make sure nobody can access my money without my explicit permission. Robert, has something happened? I hesitated. It felt like a betrayal to say it out loud, to admit that my own family couldn't be trusted, to put words to the wound that had been festering in my chest since Tyler showed me those messages. But Robert waited patiently, his hands folded on the desk, his expression open and non-judgmental. There was something about his stillness that made me feel safe, that made me believe he'd heard worse and wouldn't think less of me for my family's failings. Margaret. My son and his wife have been discussing taking money from my accounts without my permission. I need to make sure that can't happen. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and real. I'd said them. I couldn't take them back. My own son was planning to steal from me, and now a stranger knew it. Robert. I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Patterson. Unfortunately, this kind of situation is more common than you might think. We see it frequently with older clients, family members who feel entitled to funds that aren't theirs, children who've grown up expecting to inherit and don't want to wait, spouses and partners who see shared finances as their personal playground. It's one of the sadder aspects of my job, watching families tear themselves apart over money. Margaret. I never thought it would happen to me. I raised him better than this. Robert. Sometimes it's not about how you raised them. Sometimes it's about who they married or what pressures they're facing, or just the fundamental human capacity for rationalization. People can convince themselves of almost anything if the stakes are high enough. Let me show you what we can do to protect yourself. We spent over an hour together. He helped me set up two-factor authentication, so that any online transaction would require a code sent to my phone before it could go through. He set up transaction alerts, so I'd receive an email and a text message every time money moved in or out of my account, even for small amounts. And he created a verbal password that would be required for any withdrawal over $500. Robert, this password should be something only you would know, something that can't be guessed from publicly available information. Not your birthday, not your anniversary, not your children's names. Something personal and meaningful but also obscure. I thought for a moment, then smiled. Margaret. Firefly Summer. Robert. I'm sorry? Margaret. That's my password. Firefly Summer. It's what my late husband used to call the summer we met. We were both counselors at a summer camp in the Catskills, and the fireflies were particularly abundant that year. He'd tell people about it sometimes, how we fell in love during the firefly summer of '69. Robert. That's perfect. Personal enough to remember, specific enough that no one would guess it. If anyone comes in claiming to be you or claiming to have your permission to access your accounts, they won't be able to do it without knowing this password. Not your son, not his wife, not anyone. Margaret. What if they try to forge my signature on checks? Robert. We can put a flag on your account for that too. Any check over a certain amount will be held for verification before processing. You'll get a call from us and you can confirm or deny the transaction before any money moves. It adds a few days to the processing time, but it's a small price to pay for peace of mind. He also suggested I consider changing my account numbers entirely, moving my money to new accounts that Derek and Vanessa had never seen. Robert, if anyone has had access to your statements or online banking, they may have your account numbers written down somewhere. A fresh start would be safest. New account numbers, new routing numbers, a clean slate that they can't access even if they have old information. Margaret. Derek used to help me with my computer sometimes, back when Richard was sick. He might have seen the statements. He might have logged into my online banking when he was setting up my laptop. Robert. Then new accounts are definitely the way to go. We can transfer everything over this afternoon. Same bank, same terms, same interest rates, but completely new account numbers that no one else has access to. I agreed. It felt drastic, like I was erecting a fortress against my own flesh and blood. But it also felt necessary, like I was finally taking control of something that had been slipping through my fingers for years. When I left the bank 3 hours later, I had new accounts, new cards, and a new sense of purpose. The old Margaret, the one who let people walk all over her, who gave and gave until she had nothing left, who confused being used with being loved, that Margaret was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone who was willing to fight for herself. I was no longer going to be a victim in my own story, but the hardest part was still ahead. Derek called that evening, his voice casual in that forced way that told me he wanted something. I was sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, trying to find some peace in the beauty of the fading light. The backyard looked tired in the autumn light. The garden Richard and I had tended together going brown at the edges, the lawn patchy where I hadn't kept up with the watering. Derek. Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you? Margaret. I'm fine, Derek. What do you need? Derek. Can't a son just call his mother to see how she's doing? Margaret. He can, but that's not why you're calling. There was a long pause. I could hear Vanessa in the background, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I could imagine them, huddled together over the phone, coaching each other on what to say. Ask her for the card. Make it casual. Don't let her suspect anything. She's old and trusting. She won't put it together. Derek. Actually, Vanessa's card got declined at the grocery store today. Some kind of bank error, they think. The bank is looking into it, but in the meantime, she was wondering if she could use your card just to get some essentials until we sort it out. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. I thought about all the times I'd said yes, all the times I'd made excuses for them, all the times I'd told myself that this was just what family did. This time would be different. This time I had proof that their intentions were anything but innocent. Margaret. No. Derek. Mom, come on. It's just groceries, a couple $100 at most. We'll pay you back as soon as the bank sorts out Vanessa's card. Margaret. The answer is no, Derek. And I want you to listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. I know what you and Vanessa have been discussing. I know you've been planning to use my money without my permission. That stops now. Derek. What are you talking about? Who told you that? Is this about the 50,000? I know you said no, and we respected that. We haven't asked again. Margaret. It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's true. I changed all my accounts today. New numbers, new passwords, new security measures. You will not be able to access my money. Not now, not ever, not unless I specifically authorize it and verify the transaction in person at the bank. Derek. Mom, you're being paranoid. This is crazy. Vanessa and I would never steal from you. We're family. We love you. Margaret. Don't lie to me, Derek. I raised you better than that. I may have made a lot of mistakes, but I taught you the difference between right and wrong. I taught you that stealing is wrong, that lying is wrong, that taking advantage of people who trust you is wrong. You know what you were planning to do, and you know it was wrong. The line went silent. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his shock through the phone. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected the old Margaret, the pushover, the one who always caved, who always found a way to rationalize giving in because keeping the peace was more important than keeping her dignity. Derek. Mom, I don't know what you think you know, but there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Margaret. I think I know that my daughter-in-law said I should die soon so you can get my money. I think I know that my son was actually considering stealing from me to avoid having to wait for my death. I think I know that for years I've been treated like a convenience rather than a person, like a bank rather than a mother, and I think I know that it's going to stop. Derek. Tyler told you. His voice was flat, dangerous, stripped of the charm and the excuses. Margaret. Leave Tyler out of this. He's the only one of you with any integrity. He did the right thing, which is more than I can say for his parents. Derek. He had no right to go through his mother's phone. That's a violation of privacy. That's betrayal. Margaret. And Vanessa had no right to plan theft. We can debate rights all night, Derek, but here's what's going to happen. You are not getting any more money from me. Not a loan, not a gift, not a single dollar. You and your wife are going to have to figure out your lives without treating me like a bank. Derek. You can't do this. We're family. Family helps each other. Margaret. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't sit around wishing each other dead. Family doesn't scheme and plot and manipulate. You've made your choices, Derek. Now you get to live with them. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hands were shaking and there were tears streaming down my face. But underneath the pain was something else. Relief. Freedom. A weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I had finally said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Derek and Vanessa didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send so much as a text message. The silence should have been peaceful, a relief from years of manipulation and requests for money. But instead, it felt like a wound, open and raw and impossible to ignore. I went through the motions of my days, cooking meals I didn't really taste, reading books I couldn't concentrate on, wandering through my empty house like a ghost, haunting the ruins of her own life. I second-guessed myself constantly. Had I been too harsh? Should I have given them one more chance? Maybe they hadn't really meant what they'd said. Maybe it was just frustration talking, just a moment of weakness that didn't represent who they really were. The part of me that had been making excuses for Derek his entire life whispered that I'd overreacted, that I'd destroyed my family over a misunderstanding. But then I'd remember the words in those text messages. Your mother is going to die eventually anyway. Might as well use it now. And the doubt would harden into something colder, something that felt dangerously close to hatred. I heard from Tyler that there had been a huge fight when they realized what he'd done. Vanessa had screamed at him for hours, called him a traitor, called him a snake, called him names that made me sick to hear repeated. She'd threatened to take away his car, his phone, his college fund. She'd told him he'd ruined everything, that he'd destroyed their relationship with me, that he was the reason they were going to struggle financially. Tyler. Mom says I'm dead to her. She says she'll never forgive me. Margaret. Oh, Tyler, I'm so sorry. Tyler. It's okay, Grandma. I mean, it's not okay. It hurts. But I couldn't let them steal from you. That's not who I want to be. Margaret. You're a good person, Tyler. Better than any of us deserve. Tyler. Dad's not as mad. I think he's actually kind of relieved that it all came out. Like he didn't really want to go through with it, but didn't know how to stop. Margaret. Are you safe? Is anyone hurting you? Tyler. Yeah. I mean, they're not mad at me anymore. Not really. They're mad at each other. Dad keeps saying this whole thing is Mom's fault for leaving her phone out, for putting things in writing. Mom keeps saying Dad should have stood up to you years ago, should have demanded more money when Grandpa died. Margaret. And what do you think? Tyler. I think they're both wrong. I think they should apologize to you and get their act together. But I also know that's probably not going to happen. They're not really the apologizing type. He was right. It wasn't going to happen. Not yet, anyway. But what did happen surprised me. About a month after the confrontation, I got a visitor I wasn't expecting. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the garden, trying to prepare my roses for winter, cutting back the dead growth and adding mulch around the bases. The work was meditative, repetitive, the kind of thing that let my mind wander while my hands stayed busy. The doorbell rang, and I walked around the side of the house to find my daughter, Rebecca, standing on the front porch with a suitcase and a look of determination on her face that reminded me so much of her father that my heart ached. Margaret. Rebecca. What are you doing here? She looked tired from the long flight, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of restless nights and early mornings. But there was fire in her expression, the same fire I remembered from when she was a teenager and saw something she thought was unjust. She'd inherited Richard's moral clarity, his absolute conviction about right and wrong. Rebecca. Tyler called me, told me everything. I'm here because my mother needs me, and because my brother has apparently lost his mind. Why didn't you call me yourself? Margaret. I didn't want to worry you. You have your own life, your own problems. Rebecca. Mom, you're my mother. Your problems are my problems. That's what family actually means, not whatever twisted version Derek and Vanessa have been selling. She stayed for 2 weeks, the longest visit she'd made since Richard's funeral. We talked for hours every day, sitting on the back porch with cups of tea or walking through the neighborhood streets that held so many memories. We processed everything that had happened, everything that had been building for years, everything I'd been too afraid or too tired to see clearly. Rebecca had seen it coming, she said. She'd watched Derek change after he married Vanessa, watched him become more entitled, more convinced that the world owed him something. She'd watched the way Vanessa looked at money, at our house, at the things we'd accumulated over a lifetime of work. She'd seen the calculation in every interaction, the constant assessment of what could be gained. Rebecca. I should have said something sooner. I should have warned you. Margaret. Would I have listened? Rebecca. Probably not. You've always wanted to see the best in him. We all did. Dad used to worry about it, you know. He told me once, about a year before he died, that he was afraid Derek would drain you dry after he was gone. He said Derek had no concept of money, no understanding of how hard it was to earn and how easy it was to lose. Margaret. Richard said that? Rebecca. He made me promise to look out for you, to step in if things got bad. I should have done a better job. I should have been here more, should have paid more attention to what was happening. Margaret, you're here now. That's what matters. We spent one afternoon going through old photo albums, Rebecca and Derek as children, gap-toothed smiles and messy hair and eyes bright with innocence. I tried to find the moment when Derek had changed, when the sweet boy who brought me dandelions had become the man who would plot to steal from his own mother. But there was no single moment, no before and after, just a gradual shift, a slow drift toward entitlement that I'd been too close to see clearly. Rebecca, I want you to consider something, Mom. Come live with me in Oregon, or at least spend winters there. You shouldn't be alone in this big house, rattling around with nothing but memories and regrets. And you definitely shouldn't be waiting around for Derek to come to his senses. That could take years. It might never happen. I didn't say yes right away. This house held so many memories, so much of my life with Richard. The kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where he'd proposed to me over a pot of spaghetti because he couldn't wait for the fancy restaurant dinner he'd planned. The living room where we'd watched our children take their first steps, where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that had somehow become precious in retrospect. The bedroom where we'd whispered secrets in the dark, where I'd held his hand as he took his last breath and promised I'd be okay without him. Leaving felt like abandoning him, like walking away from everything we'd built together. But Rebecca had a point. What was I holding on to? Walls and windows and furniture? Objects that would outlast me and end up in an estate sale? Or was I holding on to a version of my life that didn't exist anymore? A version where Richard was alive and Derek was the son I'd hoped he'd become and everything made sense? Margaret, let me think about it. Rebecca, take all the time you need. Just know that you have options. You're not stuck here. You're not obligated to stay in a place that's become more mausoleum than home. She flew back to Oregon, but we started talking every day instead of just Sundays. She sent me pictures of her house, a little bungalow with a blue door and a garden full of wildflowers that attracted butterflies in the summer. She sent pictures of the coffee shop down the street where she spent her Saturday mornings reading the paper, of the farmer's market where she bought her vegetables from people who knew her by name, of the hiking trails that wound through the forest near her neighborhood where she walked every evening to decompress from work. I started to imagine myself there, started to think about what a new beginning might look like. A new city where no one knew my history, a new routine built around things I chose rather than obligations I'd inherited, a new version of Margaret who wasn't defined by what she'd lost or who had taken from her. In November, something unexpected happened. Vanessa showed up at my door, alone. She looked different than usual, less polished, more human. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of the perfect waves she usually wore, and her makeup was minimal, barely covering the dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing jeans and an old sweater instead of her usual designer clothes, and there was something almost vulnerable about her posture, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to protect herself from something. Vanessa, can I come in? Every instinct told me to say no. This woman had wished for my death. She had planned to steal from me. She had spent years treating me like an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a person to be respected. But there was something in her face, something broken and desperate, that made me step aside despite my better judgment. Margaret, 5 minutes. She sat on my couch, perched on the edge of the cushion like she might bolt at any moment. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. She kept looking around the room, at the photos on the mantel, at the throw pillows she'd once criticized as outdated, at anywhere but my face. Vanessa, I came to apologize. Margaret, did Derek send you? Vanessa, no. Derek doesn't know I'm here. Derek and we're separated. That caught me off guard. Whatever I'd been expecting from this conversation, it wasn't this. I sat down in the chair across from her, studying her face, trying to read whether this was genuine or just another manipulation. Margaret. What happened? Vanessa. What happened is that I looked in the mirror and didn't like what I saw. After you cut us off, Derek and I started fighting constantly. About money, about whose fault it was, about everything. And during one of those fights, he said something that stuck with me. He said I'd turned him into someone he didn't recognize, someone willing to steal from his own mother. And I wanted to argue with him, wanted to say it wasn't my idea, wanted to deflect and blame and make excuses the way I always do. But I couldn't, because he was right. She took a shaky breath, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Real tears, not the performed ones I'd seen her use to manipulate Derek. Vanessa. That conversation you read, the one about using your money, about you dying. I said those things. I actually said those things about another human being, about my husband's mother. And when Derek confronted me about it, when he asked me how I could be so cold, I couldn't even defend myself because I knew it was indefensible. Margaret. So you're apologizing because your marriage fell apart? Vanessa. I'm apologizing because I was wrong. Because I spent years convinced that I deserved more than I had, that the world was unfair to me specifically, that taking from others was justified because I'd been taken from. My father left when I was 7. He cleaned out my mother's savings and disappeared to start a new family in another state. We grew up in poverty, evicted twice before I finished high school, eating rice and beans for dinner most nights because that was all we could afford. I promised myself I'd never struggle the way my mother did. I'd never be poor, never be vulnerable, never let anyone have power over me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what little makeup she was wearing. Vanessa. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that other people weren't responsible for my trauma. My past doesn't give me the right to treat people badly. It doesn't give me the right to see you as a means to an end, instead of as a person who raised my husband, who loves my son, who has her own fears and needs and dreams. Nobody owes me anything, certainly not you. I didn't know what to say. This was not the Vanessa I knew, the woman who had looked at me with barely concealed contempt for over a decade. This was someone stripped bare, all the armor and defensiveness peeled away to reveal something raw and wounded underneath. Vanessa, I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm trying to be better. For Tyler, if nothing else. I don't want him to grow up thinking this is normal, thinking that families manipulate each other for money, thinking that love is conditional on what you can get from someone. Margaret. Tyler is a good kid. Vanessa. He is. And I almost ruined him by teaching him that everything should be handed to you, that if you want something, you manipulate until you get it. I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of a lot of things. She left after that, and I sat alone in my living room for a long time, trying to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as another manipulation, another attempt to get something from me, a performance designed to make me drop my guard so she could exploit me again. But another part of me, the part that had spent 62 years learning to read people, thought she might actually be sincere. People could change. I had to believe that. Otherwise, what was the point of anything? Christmas that year was quiet but meaningful. Rebecca flew in from Oregon and Tyler came over for dinner, but Derek stayed away. He'd moved into an apartment after Vanessa asked for the separation, and according to Tyler, he was struggling. The holidays had always been hard for people going through major life changes, and Derek was no exception. Tyler. Dad's not doing well, Grandma. He's drinking too much and feeling sorry for himself. He won't talk to anyone about what happened, just sits in his apartment watching TV and pretending everything is fine. Margaret. I'm sorry to hear that. Tyler. Are you, though? It was a fair question, asked without judgment, and I had to think about it before I answered. Was I sorry? Part of me was still so angry, still so hurt by his betrayal, by the casual cruelty of those text messages. But another part of me, the part that remembered the little boy he'd been, the son I'd loved with everything I had from the moment I first held him, that part ached for him. Margaret, I'm sorry that your father is hurting. I'll always be sorry when my children are in pain. But I'm not sorry for protecting myself, and I'm not going to rush back into his life just because things are hard for him. He has to want to change. He has to actually change, to do the work, to become someone different. Words aren't enough anymore. I've heard enough apologies that were followed by the same behavior. Tyler. That's fair. Rebecca. More than fair, actually. You've been more patient with him than most people would be. More patient than I would be, honestly. If someone did to me what he tried to do to you, I don't think I'd ever speak to them again. The new year came, and with it, a decision. I called Rebecca in the second week of January, the ground outside covered with a fresh layer of snow that made everything look clean and new. Margaret, I want to try Oregon. Not permanently, not yet. But I want to rent out this house for a year and see what it's like to live near you, to have family that actually wants me around, that doesn't see me as a resource to be exploited. Rebecca, Mom, that's wonderful. We'll find you the perfect apartment. There's one in my building that's opening up in March. 2 bedrooms, good light, a little balcony that faces the river. You can see the mountains from the living room on clear days. Margaret, then March it is. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of preparations. I sorted through decades of possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. Each item I let go of feeling like releasing a piece of the past that had been weighing me down. Richard's old clothes went to Goodwill. The children's toys that had been gathering dust in the attic for 30 years went to the local shelter. The wedding china that we'd used exactly twice, once for our 20th anniversary dinner and once for Derek's engagement party, went to an estate sale. I kept the important things, the photo albums and the letters and the small objects that held real meaning, the yellow roses pressed from our first date, the ticket stubs from our honeymoon. But I let go of the clutter, the things I'd been keeping out of obligation rather than love. In February, Derek finally called. His voice was tired, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. He sounded like a man who'd been hollowed out, all the bravado and defensiveness stripped away to reveal something fragile underneath. Derek, Mom, can I see you? Please. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. It was a place we'd never been together, somewhere without history or baggage or memories of past arguments. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His hair was longer than he usually wore it, and there was gray at the temples that I didn't remember seeing before. He looked like a man who'd been through a war, and maybe he had been, just one that happened inside his own head. Derek, thank you for coming. Margaret, I wasn't sure I would. Derek, I know. I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't. I've given you plenty of reasons to write me off completely. He ordered coffee, black, and we sat in silence for a moment, 2 people who used to know each other trying to find their footing again. The coffee shop was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of other conversations, other lives continuing on around us. Derek, I've been in therapy. Margaret, that's good. Derek, it's brutal, actually. Having to look at yourself, really look, and see all the ways you failed. All the excuses you've made, all the rationalizations, all the little lies you've told yourself to avoid admitting that you're the problem. I failed you, Mom. I failed Vanessa. I failed Tyler. I failed myself. Margaret, why are you telling me this? Derek, because I need you to know that I understand now. What you did, cutting us off, it saved me. Not at first. At first I was furious, convinced you were the villain of the story. I told myself you were being cruel, that you were punishing me for things that weren't my fault, that you'd never loved me as much as you loved Rebecca. I spent weeks feeling sorry for myself, drinking too much, blaming everyone but myself. He took a deep breath, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. Derek. But my therapist helped me see what I was really doing. I'd been using you, taking advantage of your love for years, and I'd convinced myself it was normal. That's what family does, I told myself. Family helps each other. But I wasn't helping you. I was taking from you. And you finally said no. You finally showed me that there were consequences for my behavior. Margaret. It wasn't easy. Saying no to your child never is, no matter how old they are. Derek. I know it wasn't. And I'm not here to ask for money or for you to fix anything. I'm here to say I'm sorry. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserve to hear it. You deserved better than what I gave you. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the little boy he used to be underneath the tired, broken man sitting across from me. The one who brought me dandelions from the yard and called them flowers. The one who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms because he was scared. The one I'd loved more than life itself from the moment he was born. Margaret, I forgive you, Derek. He broke down then, tears streaming down his face, and I reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time I'd touched him in months, and the contact sent a wave of complicated emotion through both of us. Margaret. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. It means we have a chance to build something new, something better, something based on honesty and respect instead of guilt and obligation, if you're willing to do the work. Derek. I am. I swear I am. Margaret. Then we start fresh. No expectations, no assumptions, no keeping score. Just two people trying to have an honest relationship. He nodded, wiping his eyes with a napkin. Derek. Tyler told me you're moving to Oregon. Margaret. For a year to start. I need a change. I need to see who I am outside of this house, outside of the roles I've been playing my whole life. Derek. That's probably good. I think we could all use some distance, some space to figure out who we are without the old patterns pulling us back. We talked for another hour, about nothing important and everything important. When we parted, he hugged me for the first time in years, a real hug, the kind that holds on and means something. Derek. I love you, Mom. Margaret. I love you too, honey. I always have. I always will. March came faster than I expected. The house was rented to a young couple expecting their first child, people who would fill the rooms with new memories and new life. My belongings were shipped to Oregon, boxes of carefully wrapped keepsakes heading to a new chapter. And suddenly I was standing in the Portland airport, blinking in the gray Pacific Northwest light, watching Rebecca hold up a sign that said, Mom's New Chapter, in big purple letters. Margaret. That's embarrassing. Rebecca. That's love. Get used to it. The apartment she'd found me was perfect. Small but bright, with hardwood floors and big windows that looked out over the Willamette River. I could watch the boats go by from my balcony, see the mountains rising in the distance on clear days, hear the calls of birds I didn't recognize but would come to love. My neighbor was a woman named Dorothy, 80 years old and sharp as a tack. She knocked on my door the day I moved in, holding a plate of brownies and a bottle of wine. Dorothy. I'm Dorothy. I've been here 6 years, know everyone's business, and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about this place, whether you want to hear it or not. Margaret. I'd like that. Dorothy. First rule, don't eat the meatloaf in the cafeteria on Tuesdays. I don't know what they put in it, but I'm fairly certain it's not meat. Second rule, the elevator on the left is faster but makes a noise like it's dying. Third rule, we have cocktail hour on Fridays in the common room, and attendance is strongly encouraged. I laughed, my first real laugh in months, and knew I'd made the right decision. The next few months were transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant stress of dealing with Derek and Vanessa, without the weight of that huge empty house filled with memories and expectations, I felt lighter than I had in years. The heaviness that had settled into my bones during Richard's illness and death, the exhaustion that had become my constant companion, began to lift. I joined a book club that met every Tuesday evening in the building's common room. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was working and raising children and taking care of Richard. I started walking 3 miles every morning along the river, watching the seasons change, feeling my body grow stronger, proving to myself that I wasn't old yet, that I still had adventures left in me. Rebecca and I had dinner together twice a week, and we talked about things we'd never talked about before. Her childhood, her dreams, her fears about the future. I learned that she'd felt overlooked growing up, that Derek had always demanded so much attention with his drama and his needs that she'd learned to make herself small, to be the easy child who didn't cause problems. Rebecca: do you ever regret it? How things turned out with Derek? Margaret: I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret what I did. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means letting people face consequences. Sometimes it means walking away so you don't drown trying to save someone who isn't swimming. Rebecca: Dad used to say something like that. Margaret: where do you think I learned it? In June, Tyler graduated from high school. I flew back to Connecticut for the ceremony, and it was the first time I'd seen everyone together in months. Derek was there, looking healthier and more at peace. Vanessa was there too, sitting separately but civil. And Tyler was radiant, this young man on the verge of the rest of his life, his whole future spread out before him. That summer, Tyler spent 2 weeks with me in Oregon before starting college. We explored the city together, went hiking in the mountains, talked about his fears and hopes for the future. Tyler: how did you know, Grandma? When Mom and Dad were planning to take your money, how did you know what to do? Margaret: I didn't know. I was terrified. But I knew that if I didn't do something, nothing would ever change. And I'd rather be scared and doing the right thing than comfortable and letting myself be used. Tyler: I want to be like that. Strong like that. Margaret: you already are. You told me the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That took courage. As I write this, it's been 3 years since that day in my kitchen when Derek and Vanessa came asking for $50,000. 3 years since I learned about their plans to steal from me. 3 years since I started fighting for my own life. So much has changed. I'm 65 now, healthy and happy and surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I can give them. Derek and Vanessa are still working on their marriage, still in therapy, still trying to be better people. They send me updates, and I send them encouragement, but I no longer feel responsible for their happiness. Last spring, Derek flew out to Oregon for my 64th birthday. It was the first time he'd visited since I moved, and I was nervous about having him in my space, in this new life I'd built without him. But he was different now, genuinely different in ways I could see and feel. He listened more than he talked. He asked about my life and actually cared about the answers. He met my friends and charmed Dorothy, which was no small feat. Derek: I like it here, Mom. I can see why you're happy. Margaret: it's not just the place, it's the freedom. For the first time in decades, I'm living my life for myself. Derek: that's how it should have always been. I'm sorry I made you feel like it couldn't be. We went for a walk along the river, the same route I walked every morning. The cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom, turning the world pink and white and impossibly beautiful. Derek: I've been thinking a lot about what happened, the whole situation with Vanessa and the money, and I realized something important. Margaret: what's that? Derek: I was angry at the wrong person. For months after you cut us off, I was angry at you for saying no, for not helping us when we needed it. But I should have been angry at myself for putting you in that position. You were just trying to survive. I was trying to take. Margaret: that's a hard thing to admit. Derek: yeah, but therapy has a way of making you face the hard things. The things you've been running from your whole life. Margaret: I'm proud of you, Derek. I know it hasn't been easy. Derek: it hasn't, but it's worth it. Having you back in my life, really back, not just as a source of money, but as my mother, that's worth everything. We hugged right there on the riverbank, with the cherry blossoms falling around us like snow, and I felt something heal inside me, something that had been broken for a long time. Rebecca is my rock, my best friend, the daughter every mother hopes for. She's talking about buying a house with a mother-in-law apartment, so we can be close without being on top of each other. I'm considering it seriously. The idea of growing old near someone who actually wants me there, who sees my presence as a gift rather than a burden, fills me with a peace I haven't felt in years. Tyler graduated from college last spring with honors. He's working at a nonprofit now, helping kids from troubled homes find their footing. He says my example inspired him, that watching me stand up for myself showed him it's possible to break free from toxic patterns. Tyler, you know what I remember most about that day, Grandma? When I showed you those texts? Margaret, what? Tyler, you didn't cry, you didn't scream or panic or fall apart. You just went quiet for a minute, and then you said you were going to protect yourself. That was so powerful to me. You didn't wait for someone else to save you. You decided to save yourself. Margaret, I was terrified. I just didn't let it show. Tyler, that's even more impressive. Being scared and doing it anyway. That's real courage. Last week, Dorothy knocked on my door with news. Her granddaughter was visiting, a young woman named Maria who was going through a divorce from a financially abusive husband. Dorothy wanted her to talk to me, to hear my story. Dorothy, you're an inspiration, Margaret. Maria needs to see that it's possible to start over, even when everything feels impossible. Margaret, I'll talk to her, but I'm not sure I'm an inspiration. I just did what I had to do. Dorothy, that's exactly what inspiration is. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because the alternative was unacceptable. Maria came over for tea that afternoon. She was 32, beautiful and broken and so afraid of the future. We talked for hours, and I told her everything. The manipulation, the confrontation, the difficult choice to prioritize myself. Maria, how did you find the courage? Margaret, I didn't have courage at first. I had desperation. Courage came later, after I saw that I could survive, after I realized that the world didn't end when I said no. Maria, I'm so scared of being alone. Margaret, being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and being with someone who takes from you isn't the same as being loved. You deserve better, Maria. We all do. She cried then, and I held her, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger because her pain was so familiar. We're connected, all of us who have been used and undervalued and made to feel like we don't matter. And we're stronger when we recognize that connection. Maria left with my phone number and a promise to call. I hope she does. I hope she finds her way to the other side of this, to the life that's waiting for her, once she stops letting other people define her worth. And me? I'm living a life I never expected. Every morning, I walk along the river and watch the sun rise over the mountains. Every afternoon, I paint or read or spend time with friends. Every evening, I feel grateful for the path that led me here, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. If you're reading this, if you're in a situation where family is draining you, where guilt is keeping you trapped, where you're afraid to say no because of what it might cost you, I want you to know something. You are not an ATM. You are not a convenience. You are not obligated to fund other people's dreams at the expense of your own security. Saying no isn't selfish. It's survival. And sometimes it's the first step toward a life you never knew was possible. I'm Margaret Patterson. I'm 65 years old. I almost let my own family steal my security and my peace of mind, but I said no, and that one word changed everything. The sun is setting over the river now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rebecca is coming over for dinner. Tyler called earlier to tell me about his new apartment. Derek sent a text that said simply, "Love you, Mom." Life isn't perfect. It never was, and it never will be. But it's mine. For the first time in a long time, it's really, truly mine. And that's worth more than any amount of money could ever be.